Good evening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the music. Figured I'd try something new. Because we're doing something new today. We're taking a little break from Birth of the Middle Ages, and we're reading a chapter from one of my favorite books, En Route. One of my favorite books, one of my favorite authors. Still, am not entirely sure how to pronounce his name, but I'm pretty sure it's Joris-Karl Huysmans, something like that. Joris-Karl Huysmans, if you want. Whatever. Pronunciation doesn't matter. But it's a French book, and the first chapter takes place in Paris, so Parisian cafe music seemed appropriate. And I believe it fit the vibe. I know a couple people in chat were liking it. I enjoy it myself. It might I was saying earlier, it might be my go-to in the future. Good stuff. So, why are we reading a chapter of this book, though? You may be asking. Partly it's because I need a break from Birth of the Middle Ages. It's a good book. I'm enjoying reading Birth of the Middle Ages. It's a good read. But I don't know, there's something about Moss's writing style that I'm not a huge fan of. I can't really put my finger on it. I couldn't really tell you what it is about it, but it's not fun for me all the time to read it. So I need a little break from that, and I need to read something that I do enjoy reading, someone whose writing style I love with a passion. The other reason is, sometimes it's good to if you're thinking about something not necessarily important, but if you're really deep diving into something, it's always good to kind of take a step back, do something different, take a break, and then you can go back into it with more gusto. Breaks are good, especially if you're doing something for a long, long time. Like we've done 14 episodes of Birth of the Middle Ages, and we're probably going to do another 14. So we're at a good half point probably with that book. So it's just kind of a refreshing. We take a step back, read a little bit of this. We're just going to read a chapter today and Friday. We're probably I don't think we're going to get through a chapter a day. I think we're just going to do half a chapter here, half a chapter on Friday, and then next week we'll get back into Birth of the Middle Ages. But yeah, no, we just kind of wanted a break. Plus, it gives me an opportunity to introduce you to En Route, one of my favorite books of all time. A very formative book for me. It definitely formed a lot of my opinions on sacred music, on the liturgy, and specifically on the monastic life. Now, he doesn't get into it in this first chapter. We're not going to be getting into anything monastic in this first chapter. But a large part of this book, the second book in the series, which is the Cathedral, and the third book in the series, which is the Oblate, all three of these books deal heavily with the monastic life, what the monastic life is, what its purpose is, kind of the history of it, the saints who were a part of it, and specifically with the Oblate, it gives a bit of a story of the actual Benedictine abbeys in France during the early 1900s, and kind of the suppression of the monasteries that took place then. But this first chapter does not touch on anything monastic. I don't remember it touching on anything monastic. But I hope y'all enjoy it as much as I do. It's a very, very good book. He has a very flowery way of describing things. But it's not that it doesn't make sense. Everything he says makes sense. It's decently easy to understand. But we'll get into that in a second. What we actually might start with is there is a little video I found. I need to pull it up. So the first chapter of this book takes place entirely inside the Church of Saint-Sulpice, which is a church in Paris, which actually burned down not too long ago. And spoiler alert, it was probably arson by a, the type that has been burning down churches in France for a while now. So, I don't know if we're gonna start with that video. It's just a video of someone took on a camcorder of the inside of the church. Yeah, I don't think we really need to. But one thing we will do is, at a certain point, there's a few Gregorian chant songs he brings up that he kind of talks about a little bit, and we will listen to them. So look forward to that. But before we get in, anything else I want to talk? Oh yeah, how does my hair look? Is it looking good? I don't know if you can tell, but I just got a haircut, so yeah, it's a little too perfect, honestly. My barber got me looking too good. Got me looking so good I'm considering getting a face cam. But y'all don't actually want to see that. It looks good to me, but I'm pretty objective when it comes to my looks. Yeah, one of these days, I'm gonna have to have the cat on stream, because one of these days it's just gonna end up being that way. I got a kitten, and very loud. I think doing this with the kitten in here would be a pain in the butt. Mostly because he likes getting on the desk now, and he likes climbing on the keyboard, and so it would just not work. All right, but before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you like. The live chat is open to all. If you would like to ask a question in the chat, or leave a comment, like and subscribe, all that stuff, I appreciate it. If not, that's fine. You do whatever you want. But En route by Joris-Karl Huysmans. Chapter 1. Actually, hold on, before we get into it, I should give a little bit of a backstory of what this book is, how it's set up, so y'all aren't confused. So this is a fictional book about basically a self-insert character of Huysmans. Durtal is a self-insert for Huysmans, and it centers around him and his conversion. There is a book that takes place before this called Là-bas. I'm not sure what that translates to in English. It's French. I've seen the English title as The Damned. But basically, he wasn't a good guy. He was a fornicator, took part in a satanic service, stuff like that. Not a great guy, but this book is about his conversion. It's fictional. It's a fictional book. All the characters are fictional, but they're all people that he knew in his life that have just, they have different names. But Durtal is his self-insert, and that's how it's kind of set up. It's the story of Durtal, but it also deals with a bunch of other topics, as we shall see. During the first week in November, the week within the octave of All Souls, Durtal entered Saint-Sulpice at 8 o'clock in the evening. He often chose to turn into that church because there was a trained choir, and because he could there examine himself at peace, apart from the crowd. The ugliness of the nave, with its heavy vaulting, vanished at night. The aisles were often empty. It was ill lighted by a few lamps. It was possible for a man to chide his soul in secret, as if at home. Durtal sat down behind the high altar on the left, in the aisle along the Rue de Saint-Sulpice. The lamps of the choir organ were lighted. Herbology. Oh, that would actually be a fantastic chapter to read. That's from the Cathedral. That's chapter 10 in the Cathedral, I think. Yeah. So I know I'm already getting off topic here. We just started, but you mentioned the herbology, and it piqued my interest because I love that chapter. Basically, it's a chapter in the Cathedral where they talk about the symbolism of plants for an entire chapter, and it's not a short chapter. But I do plan on doing a stream like this in between. It's fine. I do plan on doing a chapter like this in between every section. Yeah, we'll talk more about that later. But yes, I might do that chapter at some point a few weeks from now. Anyway, back to the text. Sorry, I got distracted. Durtal sat down behind the high altar on the left in the aisle along the Rue de Saint-Sulpice. The lamps of the choir organ were lighted. Far off in the almost empty nave, an ecclesiastic was preaching. He recognized by the unctuousness of his delivery and his oily accent a well-fed priest who poured on his audience, according to his wont, his best-known commonplaces. Why are they so devoid of eloquence, thought Durtal. I have had the curiosity to listen to many of them, and they are much the same. They only vary in the tones of their voice. According to their temperament, some are bruised down in vinegar, others steeped in oil. There is no such thing as a clever combination. And he called to mind orators petted like tenors, Monsabre, Didon, those Coquelins of the church, and lower yet than those products of the Catholic training school, that bellicose booby, the Abbé de Hust. Afterwards, he continued, come the mediocrities, each puffed by the handful of devotees who listened to them. If those cooks of the soul had any skill, if they served their clients with delicate meats, theological essences, gravies of prayer, concentrated sauces of ideas, they would vegetate misunderstood by their flocks. So on the whole, it is all for the best. The low watermark of the clergy must conform to the level of the faithful, and indeed Providence has provided carefully for this. If I understand what he's saying here, if I understand correctly what he's saying here, the preachers may be bad, but the congregation knows even less, so it might be for the best. But I love his way of describing these things here, because it's very French. The idea of describing a man's talking describing the preaching using food, to me comes off as a very French way of doing things. It's the best way of bringing in analogies. He says you get what you pray for? Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah. Yeah, my reading comprehension isn't the best, but we will get to a point where I can say something intelligent eventually. Yeah, it's a very French way of describing things. Quite love it. A stamping of shoes, then the movement of chairs grinding on the flags interrupted him. The sermon was over. Then a great stillness was broken by a prelude from the organ, which dropped to a low tone, a mere accompaniment to the voices. A slow and mournful chant arose, the De Profundis. The blended voices sounded under the arches, intermingling with the somewhat raw sound of the harmonicas, like the sharp tone of breaking glass. Resting on the low accompaniment of the organ, aided by basses so hollow that they seemed to have descended into themselves, as it were underground, they sprang out, chanting the verse, De profundis ad te clamavi, do, and then stopped in fatigue, letting the last syllables, mine, fall like a heavy tear. Then these voices of children, near breaking, took up the second verse of the psalm, Domine exaudi vocem meam, and the second half of the last word again remained in suspense, but instead of separating and falling to the ground, there to be crushed out like a drop, it seemed to gather itself together with a supreme effort, and fling to heaven the anguished cry of the discarnate soul, cast naked and in tears before God. Yeah, that's what I was saying. As I was, that's what I thought he was saying, was that he was calling the laity dumb. It was like the clerics all preach mediocrities, but it's the only thing that the laity can understand, so that's probably for the best. That's what I had understood from that before at a certain point when I had read it. Okay. I'm going to actually reread this paragraph because this is a good one to just kind of read all the way through without a break. All right. And then after we finish this little paragraph, or after we finish this section about the De Profundis, I'm going to actually play the De Profundis for you. I'm not entirely sure it's the same version. There's a couple of different Gregorian versions of the De Profundis. I'm not entirely sure it's the same one. It's hard to tell from just the writing itself. But resting on the low accompaniment of the organ, aided by basses so hollow that they seemed to have descended into themselves, as it were underground, they sprang out, chanting the verse, De profundis ad te clamavi do, and then stopped in fatigue, letting the last syllables, mine, fall like a heavy tear. Then these voices of children, near breaking, took up the second verse of the psalm, Domine exaudi vocem meam, and the second half of the last word again remained in suspense. But instead of separating and falling to the ground, there to be crushed out like a drop, it seemed to gather itself together with a supreme effort, and fling to heaven the anguished cry of the disincarnate soul, cast naked and in tears before God. And after a pause, the organ, aided by two double basses, bellowed out, carrying all the voices in its torrent, baritones, tenor, basses, not now serving only as sheaths to the sharp blades of the urchin voices, but openly with full-throated sound. Yet the dash of the little soprani pierced them through all at once like a crystal arrow. Then a fresh pause, and in the silence of the church, the verses mourned out anew, thrown up by the organ as by a springboard. As he listened, with attention endeavoring to resolve the sounds, closing his eyes, Durtal saw them at first almost horizontal, then rising little by little, then raising themselves upright, then quivering in tears before their final breaking. Suddenly, at the end of the psalm, when the response of the antiphon came, et lux perpetua luceat eis, the children's voices broke into a sad, silken cry, a sharp sob, trembling on the word eis, which remained suspended in the void. These children's voices stretched to breaking. These clear, sharp voices threw into the darkness of the chant some whiteness of the dawn, joining their pure, soft sounds to the resonant tones of the basses, piercing, as with a jet of living silver, the somber cataract of the deeper singers. They sharpened the wailing, strengthened and embittered the burning salt of tears, but they insinuated also a sort of protecting caress, balsamic freshness, lustral help. They lighted in the darkness those brief gleams which tinkle in the Angelus at dawn of day. They call up, anticipating the prophecies of the text, the compassionate image of the Virgin, passing in the pale light of their tones into the darkness of that sequence. The De Profundis, so chanted, was incomparably beautiful. That sublime prayer ending in sobs at the moment when the soul of the voices was about to overpass human limits, gave a wrench to Durtal's nerves and made his heart beat. Then he wished to abstract himself and cling especially to the meaning of that sorrowful plaint, in which the fallen being calls upon its God with groans and lamentations. Those cries of the third verse came back to him, wherein calling on his Savior in despair from the bottom of the abyss, man, now that he knows he is hurt, hesitates ashamed, knowing not what to say. The excuses he has prepared appear to him vain. The arguments he has arranged seem to him of no effect, and he stammers forth, If thou, O Lord, shalt observe iniquities, Lord, who shall endure it? It is a pity, said Durtal to himself, that this psalm, which in its first verses chants so magnificently the despair of humanity, becomes in those which follow more personal to King David. I know well, he went on, that we must accept the symbolic sense of this pleading, admit that the despot confounds his own cause with that of God, that his adversaries are the unbelievers and the wicked, that he himself, according to the doctors of the Church, prefigures the person of Christ. But yet the memory of his fleshly desires, and the presumptuous praise he gives to his incorrigible people, contracts the scope of the poem. Happily, the melody has a life apart from the text, a life of its own, not arising out of mere tribal dissensions, but extending to all the earth, chanting the anguish of the time to be born, as well as of the present day, and of the ages which are no more. Yeah, so that's just a little taste test of what Durtal has to offer. I love his analogy, how he's able to just break these chants down to their essences. It's incredible. I can't get into. I've read this chapter probably a dozen times at this point. It's just one I always just come back. It's one I always come back to. But let's actually listen to what he's talking about. Oh, whoopa. It's 5 minutes long, so. That's a little section of it. Yeah, so this tone is just one of the regular tracked tones. I think it's tracked tone 8. I don't know if he's talking. I don't know if there's a specific chant that goes with the De Profundis. I've never been able to really find one. It could just be one of these chants that have kind of fallen out of use. But even still, this tone is so a little context for what the De Profundis is used for. This is All Souls Day. Let's see, we're on page 6. Yeah, so this is All Souls Day. The week within the octave of All Souls. So they're doing the Requiem Mass, which the De Profundis is usually sung at. The De Profundis and the Dies Irae, which we will also listen to a part of. But this album, at least, is mainly just has it as a tract. I don't know if there's an actual tone that goes with it that other than the tract tone. It's something I've looked into and I couldn't really find anything. But it's still beautiful. It gives, yeah, slight music lesson tonight. I could actually pull up the chant itself and kind of show you a little bit, but maybe actually I do have a PDF of the Liber somewhere. The Liber Brevier. For those unfamiliar, that is where all of the Gregorian chant, or a lot of the Gregorian chant for the masses, is for the traditional Latin Mass, which is usually what I go to. Pretty much only what I go to. And I sing in my church, in the choir at the TLM I go to. Yeah, you should get one. You should join the choir, man. Yeah, it helps you understand a little bit what Durtal is talking about. Another thing to note is it's hard to really tell what he's talking about specifically with this choir, because the version we're listening to is all grown men. The choir at Saint-Sulpice it's a full choir. And back in this time, which is about the 1890s, women didn't sing in choir, or very rarely did. The sopranos was all young boys. And so that's what he talks about. Yeah, when he talks about these children, it's young boys who were the sopranos. And he actually mentions, spoiler alert for part of this chapter, he talks about how much he dislikes women's voices in church, which is Kino. You know, necessity now. We have to have, we live in different times, so women sing in choirs now. But so the sopranos are young boys, and then you have your tenor, your alto, or your I think in this case it's a tenor, baritone, and bass. I think that's what he says. Could they mean different things now? Probably. It's probably tenor. The baritone would sing the alto part, and the bass the bass part, obviously. But give you a little taste of some Gregorian chant. But yeah, you can. I hope you understand why I have such a love of Gregorian chant now, because it's because of this book. It's because of reading and listening to him discuss, just talk about chant, doing deep dives into what it is. Really is awesome. I didn't read the first time I read this book, between quotes. I didn't read it. I listened to it. LibriVox has an excellent audiobook of this book and the Cathedral. The man who reads it, first of all, his French pronunciation is very good, but his tone, his voice is very pleasing to listen to. It's not an Englishman. He's an American, but he has a very refined voice, and he's very pleasant to listen to, and it's perfect for this book. For this book in the Cathedral, I actually, when I post this as a video, I will link the audiobooks in the description when I post this as a video. Because it's very good to read it, but to me, I got more out of it listening to it. Mostly because I just thoroughly enjoyed listening to the narrator. He's excellent. The De Profundis had ceased. After a silence, the choir intoned a motet of the 18th century. But Durtal was only moderately interested in human music in churches. What seemed to him superior to the most vaunted works of theatrical or worldly music was the old plain chant, that even and naked melody, at once ethereal and of the tomb, the solemn cry of sadness and lofty shout of joy, those grandiose hymns of human faith, which seemed to well up in the cathedrals, like irresistible geysers at the very foot of the Romanesque columns. What music, however ample, sorrowful, or tender, is worth the De Profundis chanted in unison, the solemnity of the Magnificat, the splendid warmth of the Laudes Sion. The Laudes Sion is the sequence for oh my goodness. It's next Thursday. We're singing for it next Thursday. Corpus Christi. It is next to the Dies Irae. It is my favorite Gregorian chant sequence. I'll play a little bit of it for you. So the splendid warmth of the Laudes Sion, the enthusiasm of the Salve Regina, the sorrow of the Miserere, and the Stabat Mater. Oh, the Stabat Mater is so beautiful too. We never get to sing it. We never get to sing it because we don't sing every Sunday. We don't sing every feast day. But eventually I gotta get with the choir director about singing for the Seven Sorrows, and we have to sing Stabat Mater. The Gregorian version of Stabat Mater is so beautiful. And the sorrow of the Miserere and the Stabat Mater, the majestic omnipotence of the Te Deum. Artists of genius have set themselves to translate these sacred texts. Vittoria, Josquin de Pré, Palestrina, Orlando Lasso, Handel, Bach, Haydn have written wonderful pages. Often indeed they have been uplifted by the mystic effluence, the very emanation of the Middle Ages, forever lost. And yet their works have retained a certain pomp, and in spite of all are pretentious, as opposed to the humble magnificence, the sober splendor of the Gregorian chant. With them, the whole thing came to an end, for composers no longer believed. A thing to note about these artists, they are all very well versed in Gregorian chant. Because polyphony and the Baroque era style music, music notation didn't exist, at least in the West, until the 1100s and it came into being for Gregorian chant. And it was the sacred music. There were other styles. There were I forget the names of them. Sorry, excuse me. But there's one where it is a harmony. It's a two-person harmony where you have the chant and then you have someone else basically singing the same thing, but I think it's a fifth up or a third or a fifth up, which is 3 notes or 5 notes up, and it creates a harmony. That had existed, and there was notation for that, but it wasn't until these guys that you get the notation in 4, and you really get that fully developed. Palestrina is known as the king of counterpoint for polyphony. Bach, the king of counterpoint for Baroque music. And counterpoint is basically all of the different parts flowing in and out of each other. They don't form chords. They do sometimes, but mostly they flow in a line, and the music itself flows in and out of each part. So the bass and the tenor flow in and out of each other, and they merge with the alto and the soprano, and they're all singing different things, but it all blends together in one glorious cohesion. No voice is greater than the other. Yeah, that kind of thing. So that's what you get with them, but that all originates with chant. Palestrina was a genius of chant, or he was my mind is blanking on words. Scholar. All of these men are scholars of chant, and that is their basis. That is what they base specifically the polyphony off of, is chant. They don't take so if they're writing a polyphony version of the Dies Irae, they're not just going to take the Gregorian Dies Irae and make it into a polyphony. They're going to make their own, but they're going to use the basis of chant, of the Gregorian chant. That's why it's called polyphonic chant, because it is chant. It has its basis in the Gregorian plain chant. I was kind of going somewhere with that, but Palestrina is awesome. Josquin de Prez, we'll go with that, is also fantastic. We should definitely learn some of his stuff. De Vittoria is awesome. I don't know anything about Orlando Lasso, but Handel and Bach are my two favorite classical composers. I also really like Vivaldi. I can't stand Mozart. Do not like Mozart in the slightest. There's a couple of Mozart songs I enjoy, but I don't like Mozart. Yeah, without Gregorian chant, you don't have polyphony or Baroque and classical style music. Yet in modern times, some religious pieces may be cited of Lesueur, Wagner, Berlioz, and César Franck, and in these again we are conscious of the artist underlying his work. The artist determined to show his skill, thinking to exalt his own glory, and therefore leaving God out. We feel ourselves in the presence of superior men, but men with their weaknesses, their inseparable vanity, and even the vice of their senses. In the liturgical chant, created almost always anonymously in the depth of the cloisters, was an extraterrestrial well, without taint of sin or trace of art. It was an uprising of souls already freed from the slavery of the flesh, an explosion of elevated tenderness and pure joy. It was also the idiom of the Church, a musical gospel, appealing like the gospel itself at once to the most refined and the most humble. The true proof of Catholicism was that art which it had founded, an art which has never been surpassed. In painting and sculpture, the early masters, mystics in poetry and in prose, in music, plain chant, in architecture, the Romanesque and Gothic styles. And all this held together, emblazed in one sheaf, on one and the same altar. All was reconciled in one unique cluster of thoughts, to revere, adore, and serve the dispenser, showing to him, reflected in the soul of his creature, as in a faithful mirror, the still immaculate treasure of his gifts. And that is the point. That's why we do it all. That's why our ancestors built these cathedrals. That's why they built everything to look beautiful, was to glorify God. But especially the churches, you spare no expenses when it comes to churches, and they didn't. The Gothic styles, the Romanesque, that's all to make the house of God the most beautiful it can be. Same with Gregorian chant. I've been reading I've been reading a book called The Reflections on the Spirituality of Gregorian Chant by Dom Jacques Orlier. It's a bunch of kind of essays or lectures he gave on Gregorian chant. And let's see, where's that? There's a quote in here Yes, here it is. There's a quote in here from that really kind of puts this into effect specifically for the chant. You are unable to conceive of liturgy without the chant, which, being of the highest quality, can never be relegated to a secondary or complementary role, or still worse, considered useless. On the contrary, the chant is so entwined with the essence of the liturgical act that viewing it as a mere ornament reduces the liturgy itself to a theatrical act. Hence, your penetrating conclusion, Gregorian chant becomes the liturgy. So he views chant as so important that you shouldn't separate chant from the liturgy. Because chant isn't just used in Mass. We don't get to experience it really, but the divine office, or it's known now as the Liturgy of the Hours, I think. But the divine office was made to be chanted. It was that's how you're supposed to say it, how you're supposed to pray it, because it is a prayer. And the divine office next to the Mass itself is, I believe, considered the second greatest liturgy of the church. And it's chock full of chant. It's supposed to be chanted. And Mass, when properly said, is also supposed to be chanted. That's not to say, obviously, a low Mass you can have a Mass without it being chanted. But the best way to do it is for there to be chant. And so you can't, it's imperfect to have one without the other, you could say. Well, no, Mass is still perfect, but you get what I'm getting at. Yes. Well, the sacred should affect the secular, but the secular shouldn't have the same effect on the sacred. The secular shouldn't affect the sacred like that. So you can have chant outside of church or the liturgy. You can listen to it throughout your day, and it will perfect your day. It will elevate whatever you're doing if you listen to chant. But if you bring secular music in, then you're lowering. So chant will elevate the secular to a sacral. It's not sacred, but a kind of a sacrality. It will make it somewhat sacred, whatever you're doing, if you have a mind for it. It will help. But if you take the secular, if you take works from Wagner or Berlioz and you put them in a church, they're going to lower the sacred to the secular. The sacred brings the secular up, but the secular will bring the sacred down. There's no real meeting. There's no meeting in the middle. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, okay, yeah. Let's see. But yeah, this is what he's saying here, essentially, because at this time in history, Gregorian chant had fallen out of use in a lot of ways, except for what was absolutely necessary, which the propers still needed to be chanted, and certain sequences. The Dies Irae, which he talks about a little later, is part of the Requiem Mass. It is an integral part of it, and if you're singing it, it's the sequence. It needs to be said. It has to be said. He definitely elevated it. The use of it doesn't make it holy, but it definitely elevates it. Yeah, I would say Marty definitely, by the use of chant or the inspiration of chant, definitely elevated Halo, the game. I think that it did have some kind of effect like that. That's why it's such a good game. But at this, like I was saying, at this time, Gregorian chant had kind of fallen by the wayside, specifically for use as hymns, and they loved to bring in secular hymns. So Wagner, Berlioz, Le Sieur, Caesar Franck. They would play secular music during the times that you weren't playing or weren't singing the chant or the propers. So for the offertory hymn, the communion hymns, and whatnot, was typically secular music. And so there was a whole kind of Reformation movement called the liturgical movement, which was founded by Dom Gouranger at the Benedictine Abbey of Salem. And that was to get Gregorian chant back into the church. It was to kind of revitalize the use of chant and to help bring the liturgy back to where it should be. Because there were a lot of abuses in the liturgy, even at that point. And so it was partly to educate the laity on what the liturgy is. That was part of the purpose of that movement, but it was also to reform it and to bring it back to what it should be. And so a big part of that was the restoration of plain chant. And mostly that started at the Abbey of Salem with Dom Gouranger. And there were many others who there were some people in England who had a big effect on it, on the liturgical movement and on the restoration of chant. So it wasn't just Dom Gouranger, but he inspired a lot of people for it, including Huysmans. Huysmans himself actually, Durtal doesn't, but Huysmans, the actual person, actually spent time at Salem. Actually, Durtal does at some point in the third book, the Oblate. But he spent some time at the Abbey of Salem, and so that's where he gets a lot of these ideas from, and that's where his appreciation for chant comes from. It's from that abbey, from the monastery. Let's see. He's also an art critic. That's actually where most of his early writings are almost all art critiques. And that's an important note, which I will explain later. All right, so then in those marvelous Middle Ages, where an art foster child of the Church encroached on death and advanced to the threshold of eternity, and to God, the divine concept, mild the heavenly form, were guessed and half perceived, for the first and perhaps for the last time by man. They answered and echoed each other, art calling to art. So he is praising medieval art. The virgins had faces almond-shaped, elongated like those ogives, which the Gothic style contrived in order to distribute in ascetic light a virginal dawn in the mysterious shrine of its naves. In the pictures of the early masters, the complexion of holy women becomes transparent as paschal wax, and their hair is pale as golden grains of frankincense. Their childlike bosoms scarcely swell, their brows are rounded like the glass of the pyx. Their fingers taper, their bodies shoot upwards like delicate columns. Their beauty becomes, as it were, liturgical. They seem to live in the fire of stained glass, borrowing from the flaming whirlwind of the rose windows the circles of their aureoles, the ardent blue of their eyes, the dying embers of their lips, keeping for their garments the colors they disdain for their flesh, stripping them of their light, changing them when they transfer them to stuffs into opaque tones, which aid still more by their contrast to declare the seraphic clearness of their look, the grievous paleness of the mouth, to which, according to the proper of the season, the scent of the lily of the canticles, or the penitential fragrance of the myrrh in the psalms lend their perfume. Then among artists was a coalition of brains, a welding together of souls. Painters associated themselves in the same ideal of beauty with architects. They united in an indestructible relation cathedrals and saints, only reversing the usual process. They framed the jewel according to the shrine and modeled the relics for the reliquary. On their side, the sequences chanted by the church had subtle affinities with the canvases of the early painters. Vittoria's responses for Tenebrae are of a like inspiration and an equal loftiness. Sorry, I've been needing to clear my throat a lot. Vittoria's responses for Tenebrae are of a like inspiration and an equal loftiness with those of Quentin Mazzi's great work, The Entombment of Christ. The Regina Caeli of the Flemish musician Lasso has the same good faith, the same simple, irid, strange attraction, as certain statues of Herodotus or religious pictures of the elder Bruegel. Lastly, the Miserere of Josquin de Pré, choir master of Louis XII, has, like the panels of the early masters of Burgundy and Flanders, a patient intention, a stiff, thread-like simplicity, but also it exhales like them a truly mystical savor, and its awkwardness of outline is very touching. The ideal of all these works is the same and attained by different means. As for plain chant, the agreement of its melody with architecture is also certain. It also bends from time to time like the somber Romanesque arcades, and rises shadowy and pensive, like complete vaulting. The De Profundis, for instance, curves in on itself like those great groins which form the smoky skeleton of the bays. It is like them slow and dark, extends itself only in obscurity, and moves only in the shadow of the crypts. Sometimes, on the other hand, the Gregorian chant seems to borrow from Gothic its flowery tendrils, its scattered pinnacles, its gauzy rolls, its tremulous lace, its trimmings, light and thin as the voices of children. Then it passes from one extreme to another, from the amplitude of sorrow to an infinite joy. At other times again, the plain music and the Christian music to which it gave birth lend themselves, like sculpture, to the gaiety of the people, associate themselves with simple gladness and the sculptured merriment of the ancient porches. They take the popular rhythm of the crowd, as in the Christmas carol Adeste Fideles, and in the Paschal hymn O Filii et Filiae. They become trivial and familiar like the Gospels, submitting themselves to the humble wishes of the poor, lending them a holiday tune easy to catch, a running melody which carries them into pure regions where these simple souls can cast themselves at the indulgent feet of Christ. Born of the Church and bred up by her in the choir schools of the Middle Ages, plain chant is the aerial and mobile paraphrase of the immovable structure of the cathedrals. It is the immaterial and fluid interpretation of the canvases of the early painters. It is a winged translation, but also the strict and unbending stole of those Latin sequences which the monks built up or hewed out in the cloisters in the far-off olden times. Now it is changed and disconnected, foolishly overwhelmed by the crash of organs, and is chanted God knows how. Most choirs, when they intone it, like to imitate the rumbling and gurgling of water pipes, others the grating of rattles, the creaking of pulleys, the grinding of a crane. But, in spite of all, its beauty remains, unextinguished, dulled though it be by the wild bellowing of the singers. The sudden silence in the church roused Durtal. Yeah, no, he's not criticizing the Ophelia et Filiae. He's actually kind of, what he's saying here is similar to what I was saying earlier about the sacred elevating the sacral. It can take these, I'm bad at words, I'm sorry. I'm also saying way too much. I apologize. It takes the popular tunes and it can make them fitting for church. Adeste Fidelis is definitely a fitting church song. The complaint is more the music that there's no effort to sacralize it, where you're playing basically what you're playing Bach in church just for the sake of playing Bach, even though it's sacral. There's something I wouldn't say sacred about it, but it's beautiful. I love Bach, but it's not fitting for a church because that's not what it's made for. It's made for a concert hall. But the Ophelia et Filiae and Adeste Fidelis are examples of the sacred elevating and perfecting, not necessarily perfecting, but elevating the secular. The sudden silence in the church roused Durtal. He rose and looked about him. In his corner was no one save two poor women, asleep, their feet on the bars of chairs, their heads on their knees. Leaning forward a little, he saw, hanging above him in a dark chapel, the light of a lamp, like a ruby in its red glass. No sound save the military tread of the Suisse making his round in the distance. mm, sure. Not sure what you mean by no effort versus high effort. But how much more in this chapter do we have? 20. Yeah, it's about a 20-page chapter. Got about 10 pages left. We'll save the Dies Irae for next week. We're already an hour in. Holy cow. time time flies when I actually have something I can talk about. Oh, sorry. Let's see, do these? No, they don't have the well, Laodicean. We're gonna listen to the part of the Laodicean for you. Give you something different to look at. I give you a little something different to look at. But yeah, this is the Laodicean. This is one of my favorite.
Laudación Salvatorem, lauda ducem et pastorem.
It's a long one, so we're not going to listen to all of
Finis
it.
et
It's
cantus,
29 verses.
quantum potest
Sorry, 24
salvum
verses.
laude, quia maior omni laude, nec laudare sufficis, laudis terra specialis, panis vivus et vitalis, hodie
Excuse me.
proponitur, quem in sacre mensa cede, turbe fratrum dodene, datum non ambigitur, sit laus plena, sit sonora, sit iucunda, sit decora, mentis jubilata In mensa novi regis, novum pasca nove legis, phase vetus terminat, vetus stagem novitas, umbram fugat veritas, noctem lux eliminat.
Yeah, I love it. Y'all go listen to it for yourself. I think there's some better recordings out there. I'm trying to find a good recording of the Stabat Mater, but it looks like it's all polyphony. Yeah, that's not the one I'm looking for. Yep. Interesting. YouTube will have it. The Stabat Mater Dolorosa is beautiful, and it's a very good example of how the music translates to the text. The Heralds of the Gospel. No way. Funny story about the Heralds of the Gospel. Funny thing about them. I might explain that a little bit later. Here, this is the Stabat Mater Dolorosa.
Stabat mater dolorosa, iuxta crucem lacrimosa, dum pendebat filius, huius animam gementem contristatam et dolentem, et transivit gladius. O quam tristis et afflicta fuit illa benedicta.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. Statues are beautiful too. Very beautiful. And I love the statues too. The Heralds of the Gospel. Interesting group, the Heralds of the Gospel. I'm going to go on a little tangent here. I know a lot of people in the chat know who the TFP is because I know a lot of people in the chat personally. But if you don't know who the TFP is, they are a Catholic group founded, or technically, they're a group of Catholics. There is a difference. I can explain if you want what that means, but they were founded in the 60s by Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira. And they were founded mostly as a kind of an anti-communist group because there was a lot of communism in South America specifically. So one of their main goals was to combat communism in South America, and eventually they spread throughout the world. Became a very, very large group. They were, I think, currently they're in 27 countries. They have houses in 27 something countries. But at a certain point in the 90s, after Professor Plinio died, they had a split. Some of they kind of lived a semi-religious style life without being religious without taking vows. But they wanted to live as close to a monastic life as they could while still, obviously going out and trying to, combat communism in a peaceful, protesting way, pamphlets and books and conferences and going to the street and talking to people. But some dissenters thought they should be under the church. They thought they should be parts of the church, and they thought they should be an actual religious order. And so in the 90s, they split and became the group that caused the split became the Heralds of the Gospel. And so they kind of took a lot of the aspects of the TFP and put them into a religious order, including a lot of the symbols that the TFP uses. So it's always funny kind of finding them in the wild. Because I'd be scrolling on Instagram, and then all of a sudden there would be, boom, someone who looks like a TFP member in the habit that the TFP has, because they have a habit, because they try to be as monastic as possible. But he's not part of the TFP. He's Heralds of the Gospel. So it's a funny little. It's always weird seeing them in the wild. But yeah, I think we'll stop with the text here. I think this is a good stopping point, because we're going to get into the Dies Irae, which will take a lot on Friday. Plus, I want there to actually be enough to read on Friday. So we're going to save that. But part of what I wanted to talk about earlier is kind of why I want to read this book, to get y'all enthused about the idea of eventually adding a third stream day, which would be Tuesday. It's a thought I've had. It's not going to be for a while, but I want to do a Tuesday stream eventually, where it'll be more centered around art and art analysis, and art including obviously painting, sculptures, but also architecture and music. And I would draw a lot from his writings, from Huysmans' writings. And so I want to introduce him to you all, so you know what you're getting into. If I do something like that, it wouldn't be for a while. I'm going to have a lot on my plate coming up soon, because I'm trying to buy a house, trying to move a house onto a piece of property. That might not be for 6 months. It might not be for 9 months. But until I'm fully established in there and I have the setup how I want it to be, until I'm fully prepped, I wouldn't want to add that. Plus, I want to do more research into how I would actually go about doing that, because it wouldn't be just me looking at a painting and trying to explain it to you, because I know nothing about art. This is, that's the purpose of this whole thing, is I'm learning as much as you are. And that's what I would want to do with art, because you should have some kind of appreciation for art. I think having an appreciation for art is a must, because we need to be the best that we can, and we need to be refined, and we need to be educated. And so I want to learn about art, so we're going to do it together. That's the plan, at least. But I would draw a lot from this guy, and I would try to find some other Catholic art critics. And we would just basically find what they write about a specific painting or a specific sculpture, church, or whatnot. And we would do something similar to this. We would just read it and then have the picture there as well, so we can analyze it along with the reading. But that's not going to be for a while. What I plan on doing in the meantime is something like what we're doing today Friday, where after, in between sections of our regular book reading, we take a break and we do something like this. So for Birth of the Middle Ages, he kind of has it split up into 3 chapter sections, or is it 4 or 5, 3, 4 or 5 chapter sections. But once we get through, so we're on section 3 now, which is the rise of Islam. That's what we're going to be reading next week. We're going to be starting. Once we finish that, before we get into section 4, once we get into section 4, then before we get into section 4, we might do something similar. Probably the actually we might do the herbology lesson, the symbolism of flowers. That would be neat. I really love that chapter. That chapter of the Cathedral is so fantastic. Yeah, that's the plan. Eventually adding a Tuesday stream. I'll come up with a fun, name for it, like Art Tuesdays, but starting with a T. We'll figure something out. Is Tradition in Action a split off? I didn't realize that. I didn't realize they were a split off. Well, if you're interested in the painter in the early 90s, 1900s, you're watching the wrong show, because I don't know much about him. And this isn't political. This isn't the it's actually very, it kind of is political. But that's not the focus of this channel. Our focus is France, and he was Austrian. He did do some things in France. He was in France at one point. But we're focused on French history and French art and architecture. Because the Gothic is really is French architecture. The Gothic style got its start at the Abbey of Cluny, which is a French monastery. So Gothic really has its start in France, and then obviously the style spreads out. You have your German style Gothic, your Italian style Gothic, your Spanish style, your English style, but it originates in France. Chant also doesn't originate in France, but great strides are made, especially in annotation of chant. That's all in France. Charlemagne was a big promoter of chant. He liked chant, and he had his clerics, the clerics of France. He had them develop it in a big way, and part of how he I don't know why I'm so bad with words tonight. Part of how he promoted it was through his promotion of the monasteries, because he is the reason there were so many. He's one of the big reasons there were so many monasteries in France. A lot came over with Clovis and the Merovingian dynasty. Charles Martel founded some monasteries. He also closed a bunch of monasteries. Pepin the Great, Charlemagne's dad, founded a lot of monasteries, but Charlemagne really established the monasteries as a institution. He was very important in that, and obviously chant has its origins and its development in monasteries. But with that, I think we're about done here. Like I said, we'll continue next week, and we'll get into the Dies Irae. Dies Irae is my favorite chant. It's my favorite piece of chant. But that's about it for me. if there are any questions, comments, you can leave them in chat before we go, or I'll be posting this as a video soon here. You can leave a comment there, all that good stuff. But that's it for me. Y'all have a very good night. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I know I already told you all of this, but don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Turn the notifications on. Hit that bell. And let me know how my haircut looks. I spent a lot of time and effort and money on this haircut. Tell me how it looks. But y'all have a good night. I'm gonna put the starting soon screen back up so y'all can, because I know it's gonna take a second for the stream to actually catch up, and I don't want to cut y'all off. But good night.